Welcome back, everybody, to Vital Psychedelic Conversations. Really excited to have Dr. Michael Mithoefer and Annie Mithoefer today. I feel like you guys probably don't need an introduction, but for those that maybe don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself? And we'll start with Annie.
Yeah, I'm Annie Mithoefer. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, for the last couple of years, and I'm a registered nurse. I was trained, I'm certified in holotropic breathwork. I've been phase two co-therapist for MAPS for the MDMA PTSD trials. And right now I'm doing a lot of supervision for MAPS therapists and training for people that want to do this work later.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, good to be here.
And how about you, Michael?
I'm Michael Mithoefer. I'm right down the hall from Annie here. We've been living together for more than 50 years, but she's down in her office and I'm in mine. So yeah, we've been, really, none of this would have happened if it hadn't been for our training in holotropic breathwork, I'm sure, which we both did many years ago with Stan and Christina Groff. So for the last 20 plus years, we've been working on kind of taking the principles we learned from Stan and Christina in the breathwork and other wonderful trainers in the breathwork, and kind of applying what Stan teaches about how to work with these kinds of medicines and applying that to the MDMA research. So we've been doing research with MDMA for PTSD, for working on it for a little over 20 years now. So and it's great to see you again, Kyle. The breath work is how we met too.
Yeah, we met through Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson, which was really nice. I forget where that was. Probably at a psychedelic conference.
I think we met you one time at their house.
Or in Middletown Springs or something?
I don't know.
Or at a breathwork up there, no?
No, I don't think so. I think the first time I actually met you guys might have been at the MAPS conference in 2013. I think I introduced myself to you and said I was working with Lenny and Elizabeth. And then we hung out. We had lunch at the Groff conference. I think, was that 2014, 2015 in San Francisco?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, right. Yeah.
And then participated in that week MDMA training with MAPS in 2016.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good place to start. We usually ask people how they got involved, and it seemed, breathwork came up in both your introductions. So yeah, I'd love to hear what that was like. How did you get involved in breathwork? Like, how did you find out about it? And just your entry point here into the field.
Sure. Well, I practiced emergency medicine for 10 years before I went into psychiatry, and the end of that 10 years was around 1990, and I was still doing that, but I was really feeling that I longing for a different way of working with people and getting more curious about, what was going on underneath all these problems that were coming to the emergency department of, people not taking care of themselves or stabbing each other or whatever it was, taking overdoses. It was so obvious that there were these forces driving a lot of these problems. I was kind of catching at the tail end of the situation. So I just got more and more interested in other possibilities for my medical career. And when I was casting about for something to do with a medical degree, I came across a little article about Stan Groff. I think it was an Utne Reader. And I read that and was really struck by it because, I had my own psychedelic experiences in the 60s in college. Annie and I were in college in the late 60s. Well, she was a little behind me, but not much. So, what he was saying about a way of understanding these kinds of experiences just struck me. So I went to the medical school library to see. This was in Charleston, South Carolina, not the hotbed of progressive thinking and psychedelics in those days. It is now. But I went to the medical school library and found, sure enough, they had one of his books, Beyond the Brain.
Oh, wow.
Which no one had ever taken it out yet. There were no stamps in the back. So I took it out and I read it and I thought, whoa, this it was just so powerful. Partly explaining some of my own experiences, but just this, not only this cartography and brilliant way of understanding these things, but also this whole principle of the inner healing intelligence and the idea that, the inner healer is trying to heal you. And so even if experiences are difficult, if you are prepared for that, that can be a valuable part of the healing. So that was a real eye-opener for me. So I applied for psychiatry residency and for the Groff training, and I started them pretty much simultaneously in 1991.
Oh, awesome.
So that's how, and then, Annie, after thinking I'd been like kidnapped by a cult and gone crazy for a couple of years, then she got curious and she ended up going to breathwork, and shortly thereafter she applied for the training right after I'd finished it. So that's how we unexpectedly found this path that we've been on ever since.
Mm-hmm.
Michael and I are a little different too in just how we approach things, and he's a lot more open for new things, and I'm more of a what if, looking at all the what ifs. And during the time that he was doing the breath work, I was also going through a lot of having a lot of panic attacks, and it was a pretty challenging time, and Michael suggested that maybe I go to breath work to help me with what I was going through. And it was the furthest thing from my mind, thinking about going and trying to hyperventilate when you're having panic attacks. But anyway, I did, and just found it so incredibly useful that I joined the training and got through my panic attacks. I think the breath work really healed that. I never had panic attacks after I started doing the breath work. And it was just an incredible way for healing and incorporating the body for me. And then we went on to, once Michael became a psychiatrist, we went on to work together in a private practice, and we offered breathwork groups for 10 years with patients and people that in the community.
Oh, that's super cool. How did that go? Did people find a lot of benefit in that?
Oh, yeah. It's for patients who are going through their own therapy, incorporating something that is body oriented, and not as much, talking about it, and also the group, so that you get to experience the fact that other people have problems too, and that you can go into these deep states and really find healing. And it was incredible.
Yeah, it was really a nice model that kind of developed where people would, many people would come to the office for therapy, and then if we'd often recommend breathwork as a possibility, and then they'd come to the breathwork group, which we did, as Annie said, once a month. Or some people would come to the breathwork groups, and then they'd have a lot come up, and they'd think, well, it'd be nice if we could work on integrating this with some office visits. And sometimes Annie and I would do body work with people together in the office as part of the integration. But it was a really nice experience of seeing how having that intermittent chance to work in a holotropic state for the healing potential of that shift in consciousness just fits so well with then having time to integrate it in the office practice. But the fact that people were having these deeper experiences just made the therapy so much richer.
And would you include like any breathwork practices in individual therapy, or was that mostly outside in the group practice?
It was mostly that people would come to the breathwork groups and then come to individual work, but sometimes we did do individual breathwork sessions with people. Sometimes people just either wanted to experience that also, or there were a few people who just felt really inhibited by the group, and it helped them kind of get their feet wet to do an individual session. But for the most part, we really emphasized holotropic breathwork really is a group process, and there's so much richness in it.
We did use it sometimes for people who had dissociative disorders that didn't want to come to the group, but we could work that same way using some emotional release work on a mat and as part of the therapy. So that was the beauty of us being able to be in the same office. And if somebody did have some issues like that, I could make sure that I would be in the office at the same time so that Michael and I could be there to support them both. And um, yeah.
Awesome. What really stood out to you both with breathwork, and maybe even thinking about your own healing journey with it? And I know you said it kind of helped out with panic attacks, and yeah, just wondering like your own kind of healing journey with that, and why did it really stick with you guys?
Hmm. Well, I think, I had tried to go to a psychotherapist, and I'd also tried medicines for the panic attacks. And I don't know, for people that have had panic attacks, sometimes they come on for no reason at all. And a lot of mine were that, and as you have more of them, one of the things is you just start feeling crazy. Because you don't know when they're going to come. And so medicine certainly helped me get through maybe the early parts of my panic attacks, but so much of the breath work is nonverbal and just going into these experiences. And I think I'd had, some small, I'd say probably small traumas growing up. But I never looked at those things as being issues, and just my upbringing and my family dynamics, and exploring those in breathwork in a different way than just sitting and having somebody, talk to you about things
Yeah.
was so much more of what I really needed.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Michael, you want to add
Yeah.
anything there?
Yeah, when I went to the breathwork training at first, you know, I was focused mainly on learning to work with other people because I figured, well, I've had quite a few psychedelic experiences in the past. This is helping me maybe resolve some of them. But I've had a lot of therapy. I'd done Jungian analysis and had quite a bit of other therapy. So I was thinking, okay, now I'll learn to work with other people. As soon as I got on the mat, I realized, oh, there's whole layers of stuff that I have never gotten close to. And so it was just so useful for me. Some of the time I love intensity and change and being surprised. So sometimes the intense experiences are just so interesting and enriching. But maybe the most important part were the really difficult ones when suddenly I'd feel really stuck, or I'd come against these basic underlying fears, and just the experience of having the support to be encouraged to stay with that as much as you could, and also, as Annie said, involving the body.
Yeah.
Those were the most healing for me sometimes, finally, to get to the tears underneath all the grief about the people who had died under my care in the emergency department, for instance. So it was those really difficult experiences, but having the preparation and the support and realizing, being taught the value of staying with them and just being as fully in it as you can, and, disabused me of that idea of a good trip versus a bad trip. It's like when you enter these states, whether it's with breath work or medicines or other practices, you're apt to have some really affirming experiences and some really difficult ones. And it taught me by direct experience how valuable both of those are. So I think that, that made all the difference in terms of learning to feel comfortable supporting other people in these intense places when you've been through it yourself,
right,
in one way or another, to trust the process, because that's what we learned from Stan. And at first I had to just trust Stan that he said it was okay to trust the process. But then little by little, we learned a deep trust in each individual's healing process.
Yeah. I wonder if we could dig into that a little bit. And, I just want to make a comment really quick beforehand. I'm hearing both of you say the body. That was really helpful with breath work. And I would just say, yeah, that's what really kind of turned me on to it as well. Working through different traumas and having, some early psychedelic experiences, being kind of way outside, and then being able to process all that information with my body. I found that to be really beneficial. But I want to come back to follow the process. I know sometimes that is sometimes a cliche in this world, and people are always like, well, what does that even mean? And so how do you describe that? Like, what does following the process look like?
Yeah, we talk a lot about that because we used to refer to it mainly as non-directive therapy, and now Rick Doblin thought a better term was inner-directed, which we agree with. So, but it's a fair question that we ask ourselves all the time. Like, what do we actually mean by that? Because it's clearly not that the therapist or facilitator never gives direction, or you just sit there and say, I'm trusting the process no matter what. It's the role of the sitter or therapist can be so important. So I think one way to think about what we mean is that it's not that you never offer any direction or engage and help people if they're stuck. Is that only happens in service of what's already trying to arise spontaneously. That as long as the point is to give plenty of time and encouragement for that process to just take its own path and unfold in its own way, and then only if there's some call for some direction or support to help that get unstuck or really unfold fully. That's really what it means. That what you may be offering quite a bit sometime in the terms of support and direction, but it's only in service of what's already happening, rather than having an agenda that this person needs to talk about this, or this person needs to release this from this part of their body. We go in with a not knowing, kind of beginner's mind as much as we can, and to try to support what's happening.
Annie, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, well, and I think it's sometimes it's just like, for instance, I think it's a little different with breath work versus the MDMA work. But for instance, if you're just lying there and nothing's happening and you're in a breathwork session, you would go into the nothing happening and just feel the nothing happening in every possible way that you could feel it, and when it's come up for you in the past. And as you go into it, suddenly, and it happens in the MDMA sessions too, but as you go into it, more things start to unfold about that. And you start to realize, wow, this has been part of my life before, and you might have memories and things. So it's following that thread of how it's happening, and then trusting that there is a way that this is going to take you to healing, because it's not always linear, and it's not always obvious that what you're doing that day in breath work or what you're doing that day in MDMA therapy is going to take you to healing. It might take you to something else. It might make you feel worse before you feel better. So it's kind of like that, I guess I would add. Yeah. For me, trusting the process really took being in those extreme states in breathwork groups and seeing people go into whatever they were going into and coming out whole gave me the confidence to be able to do the therapy with MDMA, I think.
Yeah.
And from minute to minute, it's like someone's blood pressure is going up with the MDMA, and it's like I have to breathe and say, trust this process, So, yeah.
Well, that's a really important point, I guess, just about doing some of this work on the facilitators end, or the sitter, or the therapist end. Like, yeah, what does following the process look like for you as the person kind of in that room creating that container?
Mm-hmm. yeah, sometimes you're not really sure.
Yeah.
We've had participants that didn't talk hardly at all during an 8 hour session, maybe just a few words to let us know they were okay and they were doing fine, and they just wanted to keep going deeper. And we didn't know until the next morning that it was just like this profound experience that the participant wrote about.
Mm.
And um, so, you're sitting there and you're holding space for something you don't have any idea what's happening, but trusting that there's something that's happening for that person that is taking them to a place that is going to be healing for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think, this is an idea, I think, that comes from, or an understanding that comes from just observation. Stan learned this by working directly with thousands of people with LSD in the beginning. And of course, other cultures, in some cases for hundreds of thousands of years, have developed knowledge about wise use of these kinds of states. So it's got a really solid, it sounds a little new agey or woo-woo, trust the process and the inner healing intelligence, but it's based on reality that people have observed for a very long time. And, we see it, we just get it reaffirmed again and again that, I think to me, one of the most important reasons for valuing this inner-directed approach and trusting the individual's healing process is that it allows for the unexpected to happen. What we see so often, like in recent years, we spend quite a bit of time watching videotapes of research therapists in MDMA sessions that have been through our training. And they're a wonderful group of therapists, but for a lot of them, it's a real adjustment in how they're working. So what we notice is I almost never see a therapist doing something that isn't useful in some way, in this group of therapists anyway. But I think the point is, even if the therapist has an idea, well, I think we should, work on this or that in this way, that might be useful. But I think the reason for not emphasizing that is that you never know what would have happened otherwise.
Right.
And we just see it so often that we think someone maybe needs to first go to process some war trauma, but then something entirely different happens. Or they maybe have an affirming experience, or they process something from childhood that was really important to work with first, and then maybe later they'll process the trauma. So we just see how valuable it is to allow for and encourage the chance for the inner healer to do something that we never could have conjured up with our thinking mind, and we might have missed a real opportunity if we'd been too focused on some idea we had.
Yeah. You mentioned inner healer, and I know we've kind of maybe defined a little bit of it by talking about following the process, but I wonder if you could define that a little bit more for people that don't know that term.
Michael, you want to?
I'll give it a try. Well, I don't know what the best term is. Inner healer, is not a bad one, but it's a little bit of an anthropomorphization. Mm-hmm. So that's not perfect. Inner healing intelligence is pretty good, but then people can get hung up on what do you mean by intelligence? So I think inner healing capacity maybe is a good one. And I think, having been an emergency doctor for 10 years, I've used this analogy quite a bit, but in a way it's analogous to a wound, treating a wound. If people came in with like a big gash in their arm, I had no idea how to heal that. I just knew how to remove obstacles and create favorable conditions for healing,
right.
Like clean out the gravel, wash it out, sew the edges together. That didn't do any healing. That just removed obstacles and created conditions where healing had a better chance. But the process for that was innate in the person. And I didn't think about it at the time, but I never saw like a 7 centimeter laceration turned into an 8 centimeter laceration when I checked on it a few days later. Mm-hmm. It always was trying to move toward healing. It might still be 7 centimeters if something got in the way. So then if there was like a foreign body or an infection or not enough blood supply, something like that, maybe I could remove those obstacles and create better conditions. But the organism was always moving toward healing as long as it didn't get blocked.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot like that. Another analogy these days is immunotherapy for cancer. You know, the idea that we're just stimulating and removing blocks to the person's own capacity to heal this. Mm. So I think it's very clear the same exists in the psyche, and you know, this is the best we can do in terms of models of understanding it. But I think it's just as every bit as real as the wound healing or the immunotherapy. Just we don't understand the mind as well as we do the immune system.
Right.
And one thing to think about PTSD is it's an obstacle to that natural, because some people who've had trauma do heal eventually and don't get PTSD, but the people that got PTSD, that's the obstacle for them, and this work is helping them remove those obstacles that have come in to block the healing.
Yeah. It reminds me of something James Hillman wrote about, and I think I'm paraphrasing it, but I always think it's a direct quote, but said something along the lines of, psyche doesn't need to be treated, it needs to be served. And it just makes me think about like a different approach of like following the process. Where does that want to go to? Instead of saying something's wrong and we need to do something to it. And I think there's a lot of unlearning that needs to be done, maybe on both sides for participants, clients, and the therapists. Like I know sometimes when I'm talking about this to some clients, they're like, what do you mean follow the process? Like, you know, you're supposed to tell me what to do. And, you know, really kind of describe that more non-directive approach. And there's almost like some uneasiness there of like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be the expert in the room.
Right. Yeah, sometimes people say, can't you just give me a list of what I have to check off to get better? I'll do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive that sometimes, of course, people that are suffering have an intention to heal, and it's counterintuitive that sometimes the best way to serve that intention is not to push so hard and to be curious and wait to see what's going to happen if you have the right conditions.
Mm-hmm. Beginner's mind.
Yeah. I guess being involved in this work for so long with the breath work and then doing the MDMA studies, like, are there any like big takeaways that you've learned through this whole process? And I know that might be a big question, but just around the healing process in general with people.
Annie?
Oh boy. That people do get better with love and care. Sometimes it's just that extra 15 or 20 minutes at the end of a breathwork session when somebody is still kind of shaky, or sitting with them and having a meal after the breathwork, or the extra times that you take with people, supporting people. It really makes a difference. I think that's also part of what we learned in breathwork, is that there is this way that it becomes a family, a new family or a new support system where people really care about you and check on you, and the caring, is a big part of it. Accepting people where they are and for who they are, and the non-judgmental approach. There's something I think that we carry from that tradition of making soup for the group, and making sure the covers are not wrinkled.
That's always a big thing. People like that, like, putting the sheets back in place, and so small things.
Yeah. And I feel like Michael and I, when we started doing the the study, the MDMA study, we really, that's what we're trying to convey. I think there's a little bit of like, uh, hope that that doesn't get lost.
Mm.
I mean, this is clinical research that's been happening, and people are doing a really nice job with it. But I don't want that part to be lost.
Yeah.
You probably know what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
Kyle.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, kind of along the lines of what Annie's saying is, as Bessel van der Kolk says, people uh, recover in the context of a relationship.
Mm.
And so even though we talk so much about the inner healing intelligence and the person's own capacity, it's also being in a field of relationship and support makes all the difference. So, maybe one of the main takeaways for me from all this work is like, yes, some people have terrible trauma that I haven't had to deal with. But on another level, this is human healing work for human growth and healing that's there, a challenge for all of us. So, one thing that's great about the breath work that's in groups is, if you walk into the room in the middle of a breathwork session, you might think you're in a psychiatric hospital someplace for people that are really out of control. But then if you came back at the end of the day, you'd see people getting up and going out and being very effective and responsible in the world, highly accomplished people. But you take any of us and give us a chance to open to what's there, we've all got this, challenge and opportunity for growth and healing that is there in these shifted states of consciousness. So I found that to be so true and kind of comforting that, as you say, it's not like I'm the expert, you've got a problem, here's your problem.
Yeah.
It's more like, let's discover how to heal together the way humans can heal in a deep way.
Yeah. I laughed at the just observing breath work. I remember Joe and I were doing like a small intro breath work session at the Arizona Psychedelic conference. It was in a small kind of yoga studio, very echoey. But yeah, the second session that we had, people were so loud. People were like peering in. I was like, geez, I wonder how much chaos we're causing here with everybody. Yeah, I wonder how much you could talk about just breath work and kind of how it's infused with psychedelics. So I mean, this is like something, the basis of psychedelics today, and really how Joe and I got started was to really kind of continue Stan's work, and obviously being students of Lenny and Elizabeth, wanting to pass that on. And we noticed like in the earlier, people weren't talking about it as much, and that was definitely one of the missions when we got started here, was to kind of bring breath work back into this conversation. And so why do you think like that framework could be really important for people starting to get involved in the psychedelic space?
You mean the framework of breath work?
Yeah, Stan's lineage and just breath work.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting because, of course, we all knew all about where Stan's work came from, the LSD work before it was illegal. And yeah, when we were in the training, it was kind of a thing that you didn't talk much about that. And it was definitely not a thing where people were taking psychedelics during the breathwork. I'm sure some people sometimes did, but in general, it was a very clear separation. And I think part of that was because of the times and, I think it was probably really important at that time. But then I think it's important what you're doing to come back to realize also, a lot of this comes from those traditions and what can be learned. And we run into people that think that breath work is only something you do if you didn't have any psychedelics. Other people think that breath work is okay, but psychedelics aren't because you're taking drugs. And to me, it's just a matter of, they're very complementary, I think. they're powerful tools. There are a lot of overlap, and but some important differences. In general, as Annie said, breathwork tends to involve the body more. Again, lots of overlap, but so I think they just are powerfully complementary. And there's something great about breathwork to know that you can have these experiences without taking anything. Just having that experience of, wow, look how these places are not as far away as I thought they were.
Yeah, one thing we did with the phase 3, well, the therapists that are now working in the phase 3 studies, was when we were doing the training for them, one of the weeks was coming to a group, and we did breath work all together. Diane Haug came, and it was just remarkable, for people that had never done it before, to see how the group just came together and became more cohesive, and and also learning about the body. So a lot of the therapists had never had any introduction to what it's like to do emotional release work, and even though it doesn't come up that much, it's a great tool if you're trained in it, for after the MDMA sessions, for integration. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, we had grumblings when we did that. Started having we'd have an extra 5 days after the main training at another time where the breathwork would be part of that. And some of the really wonderful experienced therapists who also had experience with psychedelics were grumbling, like, why are we wasting our time on this kind of crap?
Yeah, some people hate it because it takes too much work.
Well, that was before they tried it. Oh. After they tried it, they said, wow, I see what you mean. We weren't wasting our time at all.
I think the other thing about it is just the framework. When you've had the training with Stan or any of the other incredible teachers we've had, just that framework of what Stan teaches about the themes that come up, and how the birth process can sometimes be there, and having a bigger picture of what the healing process can look like. And I think all of that is just something that's really, really useful in this work. I hope we don't lose it. Yeah.
There's two elements, part of breath work, that I'm curious to see how maybe it unfolds with the future of psychedelic therapy, and that's the group process, and maybe doing group psychedelic work in that way, where maybe you do have the breather, or I guess medicine pair, one person sitting, other person taking medicine in a group, and then body work, which I know is really important, but also needs to be used with caution, right? So make sure people have enough training in that to be able to do that. And I wonder any of your thoughts around body work and the group part.
Yeah, well, we're always talking about touch and ethical uses of touch, and with COVID, it's been such a thing that people can't even be in the room without masks. But yeah, if you're trained in body work that's part of breath work, then I think it's a really great thing to use for integration. It comes up a little bit, I'd say, in some of the sessions where people just want a little bit of resistance work, or if they're feeling tight, they might want you to put a little pressure here or there. But we discourage people from doing any kinds of body work if they're not trained in it, of course, and their scope of their practice. Yeah. And also just all of the things about touch, making sure that you have consent and people know a word to stop if they don't want it anymore. And so any of those other forms of body-oriented psychotherapy, like somatic experiencing, or I'm blanking on the
Hakomi,
other one, but
sensory
Hakomi,
modi,
yeah, all of those. I mean, they all incorporate something, whether it's with touch or just experimenting with motion in the body or noticing how you hold your body. those things are key to how we hold patterns and hold ourselves and learn how to let go and learn more about that. Massage, I mean, all of that is so good.
Yeah, we're so steeped in our breathwork experience and doing a lot of body work that it's been interesting to try to sort out how does that work with training new therapists to do MDMA assisted therapy. And one thing about it that as Stan always says, as important as the body work can be, which we've all had our direct experience of that. Still, as Stan says, the first choice is always to see if the body can do it itself and encourage the person to see what the body needs. And even, in breath work, often that's all that's needed. And I'd say in MDMA sessions, it's even more often that that's the case. So in many ways, which helps with this whole dilemma about how much body work should people do if they're not trained in it and how much is really necessary. That's what the edge we've been kind of trying to sort out. So the reality is it's really important to bring attention to the body, encourage people if something's coming up in the body, encourage people to let it express itself. And happily, especially with MDMA sessions at least, so often that is all that's needed. But then we do think, basically our position when we're training therapists is, if you are not comfortable, well, first off, all touch is optional and with very, very, very careful agreements and frequent checking and make sure the person's in control of that, and all those ethical and boundary considerations are so important. So that's a given. But having had a good discussion with people ahead of time, we think that if someone isn't willing or comfortable at least holding someone's hand or maybe putting a hand on their shoulder for some nurturing touch, then this isn't the right line of work for them. Because I think, my opinion, I think Annie agrees, is that that could be an error of omission.
Yeah.
That if someone's revisiting some experience where they really needed that nurturing and they're asking for it and you're not able to give it to them at all, then that would be a problem. But beyond that, I think it's fine if people, if they're not comfortable with doing more than that, they can just have that discussion with people and say, is there another way we can help your body do that? Or, there are ways you can work around it. So I think that's kind of the bottom line. If you have some good, really ethical, nurturing touch with clear boundaries, then that's sufficient.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you're trained in more kind of resistant work, that can be good too, but not absolutely necessary.
Yeah. Thinking about like that error of omission and just thinking about, maybe somebody's abandonment stuff comes up and they're reaching out for a hand and thinking about not being able to offer that. Could that cause a little bit of more trauma of them re-experiencing that, not getting their need met? And I wonder, just within therapy, would therapists need to worry about offering that hand? I guess always thinking about licensing boards and touch within psychotherapy and how it's really urged against. But I wonder how, maybe this like new paradigm with MDMA and understanding the importance of that could really kind of change that. And do therapists need to like worry about that? Obviously get training, but do you think boards would essentially look down upon some of that nurturing touch?
I think that for some kinds of licenses, that is a problem. I think happily there are more and more body-centered kind of therapies that have journals and organizations now. So I think it's shifting a little bit, but I think that's still somewhat of a challenge. I mean, I remember when we first opened our practice in Charleston, when we moved back from Vermont in '95, I think it was, and we started doing breathwork groups, and that wasn't a thing in Charleston those days. And so I went to a malpractice attorney and asked her to help me write an informed consent for people doing the breath work. and she said, if you're going to lie on the floor with your patients as a psychiatrist, I can't help you. That is not the standard of care, and you're touching them. That's not the standard of care. I can't really help you. And I said, well, I'm going to do it anyway, so please just do the best you can. So, we never had more than 30 years have passed, and so far, no problems. But I think it is an issue that happily is shifting. And I think doing it in groups really helps. Or doing it with, at least with another therapist. And also in the MDMA work, we videotape everything.
Yeah.
So that gives people a little more sense of comfort. But, to acknowledge, as a lot of listeners probably know, we had an serious sexual ethical boundary violation by one of the therapists in Vancouver during the phase 2 trials. It didn't happen until after the active part of the study, but the person hadn't finished the final measures. And that was, there was a situation where Richard Jensen was working with his wife, who's a psychiatrist, and it still happened, not during the MDMA sessions, but so it is, sadly this happens in all kinds of therapy all too often, but there's real reason to be extra careful with these very vulnerable states and the way people can really get attached to their facilitator.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
Michael, maybe talk about the study that's going to happen in Portland. You know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we are really interested in group psychedelic therapy. Chris Stauffer, who's a psychiatrist in Portland now, he worked on a study in San Francisco with psilocybin with group integration sessions. But now we got a protocol in development where people will have, this will be veterans, I think the first one. Anyway, it'll be, people will have one group preparation and then one individual prep and MDMA session with one individual integration session. And then after that, it'll all be group integration and then a group MDMA session together afterwards. So, we're going to be curious to see how it does. Our results with individuals have been very strong, of course, but I think it'll be interesting to see. There are probably some disadvantages, but I also think there's some big advantages of the group energy and the way people can share afterwards, a lot like breathwork.
Could you talk about some of those advantages and disadvantages?
Well, I think the individual attention, there's something very powerful about 8 hours and you've got the whole time, it's your time. And people can just really drop into their process and they can talk or not, but the facilitators, therapists are there. I think there's a lot of power in that, which is why we're starting with an individual session, at least in this first study. But then, as the three of us have experienced with holotropic breathwork, you don't talk to everybody during the session, but the sharing in the evening or the next day can be such a powerful extension and integration of the experience that I think that'll be true with the MDMA too.
And obviously it may help with cost for having, the two therapists and for 8 hours to help with that, maybe having some interns or other people be the sitters. In this study, it'll probably, how many people are the therapists, Michael? Is it 3 for the group?
4 for 6 people to start with, so it's just changing the ratio a little bit. We're being pretty conservative in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
That's not bad. And when is that? That's starting up pretty soon?
Yeah, probably this year sometime.
Oh, awesome. Well, I'm excited to learn more as that unfolds.
Mm-hmm.
I guess on the topic of studies, any updates with what's been going on with the MAPS trials and any updates that you guys would like to share with the audience?
Well, people probably know that we had a very successful first phase 3 trial that we published last year in Nature Medicine. The second, so we need 2 of those to apply for a new drug application. The second one is over 60% enrolled now. So, everything's been slowed down by COVID for sure, but we've managed to keep limping along, and now things are picking back up again. So we expect the second trial will be finished enrollment by late this spring, probably.
Oh, awesome.
So sometime in 2023, if all goes well, still don't know the results, of course, but if all goes well, we'll be applying for a new drug application in probably 2023.
Okay.
Probably get the application in 2023, but these are rough estimates. But so that seems to be going well. It is going well, and we just had we have an expanded access program, which is another name for in some countries it's called compassionate use, which the FDA granted us to allow some sites to treat people outside of the phase 3 protocol. It's still a protocol, but it's a treatment protocol, so much simpler, more flexibility, no placebo group, and the results don't count for the outcome for the new drug application, but the safety data counts. We'll collect it all, but the FDA will be focused on the safety data. So we're very excited. The first site is recruiting right now.
Oh, wonderful.
Actually, it's in Waynesville, North Carolina, about 30 miles from where we're sitting now.
Are you guys part of that?
And there are a bunch of, I think 9 sites now around the country that are going to be starting.
Right, because there was approval for about 10 sites, right? And 50 participants, maybe?
Well, they gave us approval for 50 participants. We asked for 1,000. They said 50, and we appealed that a number of times, or responded to clinical holds to try to convince them that we needed more than 50, and we finally realized that's all we're getting at this point. But we did tell the FDA that after the first 35, we're going to send them the safety data, and then ask for more. Whether we'll get more or not, we don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, at least that's finally getting underway.
Yeah, was that all kind of paused due to COVID as well? I know some people were asking. I haven't heard any updates, so that's really helpful to hear.
Yeah, COVID definitely slowed that down for sure, too. Although most of the slowdown was from 9 months of trying to get permission to do more than 50, because we had about well over 50 sites. I think there might have been close to 100 sites that applied, but we had to limit it to 10, and I think it's down to 9 now. I'm not sure. We had to limit it just because with only 50 people, you can't have a site open and then just give them like one participant. So we're hoping that'll expand, but that's exciting that that's going on. Our phase 3 trials in Europe are underway, or the phase 2 trials have started in Europe, and going on, they'll be leading to phase 3. And we've already treated people in Netherlands and Czech Republic, and other sites in other countries are starting soon. Israel has a compassionate use program that the government is paying for everybody to get treated.
Wow.
And that's going to be starting soon.
And is that particularly for PTSD, or are they opening that up to...
For PTSD, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're going to do a training for some more therapists in Brazil in the spring. There's a group, there's already a group that's trained, but there'll be some others that are added to that.
Very exciting.
And we've got other exciting news is, we did a small couples pilot study with Candace Monson and Ann Wagner, who are in Toronto, and they just are enrolling their first participant in a controlled trial in Toronto using cognitive processing therapy with or without MDMA, the control group, really well-designed study. And then right behind that will be a couple study, like what we did in Charleston, but a big controlled trial with cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy with or without MDMA sessions added. So that's going on, and Candace are really
so you guys finished up the couple's research that you were, because I remember, I think the last time I talked in like 2016, you guys were talking about getting that started. So that's all complete.
Yeah, we completed it. It was only 6 couples, but that's all we needed really to prove the concept. The results were really good, but we had no control group, so it didn't prove anything. Right. So now we're setting out to have a control group and see what happens with that. But it was really gratifying, and they were, as Candace, who developed cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy, said, well, we can't prove it, but I'm sure that these people would not have done nearly this well without the MDMA. So she has a chance to prove that now.
It's very exciting.
And the Bronx VA is starting their study. They've enrolled at least their first participant, who will have their session soon.
Is that with Rachel Yehuda?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is the second study, and there's a study just started a little bit ago at the Loma Linda VA. So now this will be 2 studies in the VA, and Annie and I are going to do another training for VA therapists at the Bronx VA in a few months to start. They're working on developing a training center for other VA therapists.
Oh wow! So, and so it sounds like they're kind of receptive to that. I know that's a pretty conservative type of institution with slow change, but it sounds like they're open to that.
We tried to get the IRB at a VA to look at our protocol to see about collaboration first. I think it was about 2005, and finally in 2021 a study started at a VA.
Well, and Barbara Rothbaum has been doing studies at Emory too, and she works with the VA too, right, Michael?
Yeah, she did a animal study rodents showing MDMA increased fear extinction, and then she did a human healthy volunteer study showing the same thing in humans, and now they're soon going to be starting a protocol with MDMA with prolonged exposure therapy at Emory. But yeah, Barbara's a major VA researcher also.
Well, it's exciting to hear that they're finally picking that up. Guessing probably all the news. It's hard to ignore, right? And I guess if you're really kind of serving that population, it makes sense that they would finally start to make that shift. Yeah,
another sign of a shift is last weekend I was speaking at it was a workshop that the National Institute of Health organized to talk about psychedelic research and what we've learned about designing clinical trials in psychedelics. So attention is shifting.
It's exciting times. It's very exciting times. I know we're starting to hit time, and then I wonder if we could touch on one more topic, and that's about training. So I know you guys are involved in the MAPS training. Any updates there? And then I know there's a lot of people that are always reaching out about how to get involved in that, and always want maybe updates around the MAPS training and whatnot. I'm always kind of referring them, get on their newsletter. But any updates or anything that's been going on the training side over there?
Yeah, a lot has been going on. We're facing this challenge of how do we, this leads to approval, which we think is a very good chance. How are we going to meet the demand if it really is as effective as it's looking like? There's going to be a big demand. There's already quite a big demand to get in the study. So, it's interesting because, unlike a normal pharma company, this is not about profit. It's a public benefit corporation, but we've got the same kind of mandate in a way that we need to scale it as fast as we can, not to make more money, but to get the treatment to more people. Yeah. So how do we do that without losing the qualities that we've been talking about this whole time, as Annie said? how do we not lose that essence? So we're in the process of figuring that out. I can't say we figured it out. We're definitely, our trainings have gotten bigger. And of course, that was all kind of jump started by COVID when we had to suddenly go online with our trainings that had been in person until then. And that, had some real advantages. We had a crash course in how to do it online. And, although we really missed the contact with people in person, we also saw it's more scalable. And one of, emblematic of some of the advantages are that the training, early in COVID that we were going to do in the Netherlands, we ended up having to do online, and we were able to invite a lot of other people, including like 20 therapists from Somaliland that could come for free.
Oh, wow.
So it really, highlighted there's some real advantages to doing it as much as we can online.
Yeah, there's like a fine balance, right? It does offer a lot of accessibility for people who need to travel, can't afford that, to be able to like really scale globally to some extent.
Yeah. So we've developed our online portion to be much more robust, because some of it is better done online. The more didactic part, people can do it in their own time. They can go back to it, and it's more efficient. So we're retaining that, but now we're trying to figure out how much can we scale without losing enough of connection and personal contact and people really getting the idea. I think we overshot a bit. There was a training with 500 people this summer.
Wow.
And I say that advisedly. I think it was still a wonderful training. People got a lot from it. But we all concluded that I think that was actually bigger than we want it to be. So we need to drop back. And so we're figuring out we're going back to some in-person trainings next year.
This year.
This year, which used to be next year. So we're going to try to have a hybrid. There will always be some online, even the people that come to in-person. But then we're going to try to have a way for people that can't or don't want to come in person to have it more intimate online, have smaller groups, especially smaller home groups, dividing the cohorts up. And then, so we're working on refining our own MAPS training, and also we're now, we're collaborating with a bunch of groups that have their own trainings, the first being CIS through their CPTR program. Annie and I have been doing that. I think this is the 6th year of doing a training embedded in that. And now Marcelo and Bruce are doing Naropa. And now we're really eager, we're exploring, as you know, partnerships with others, people who have their own trainings, to see how we can, I think part of expanding is not just only focusing on MAPS training, but focusing on collaboration with people. So one thing I would like to see is more regional and local training hubs where people could get their training closer to home, but also then be connected with a group where they could get supervision and they could get peer support and ongoing continuing education. So there's a lot happening in figuring all that out, but I think we can scale. We just need to do it with a lot of creativity and as much wisdom as we can muster about how not to lose the essence.
Yeah, and I think this is probably going to be the bottleneck for delivering a lot of psychedelic assisted therapies, right? It's like it could come to market, but not being able to get enough people trained, and I think maybe adequately trained as well. It's something I always think about of like, could we be doing harm to people to some degree if we're just going through very fast, quick trainings for people, like a weekend workshop, and okay, now you can go do that, versus like probably interesting from your perspectives of going through the breathwork training. I mean, so much of that was really, I think, like doing your own work, right? Like participating, engaging in the process. What was that minimum? I don't know how that's changed over the years, but was it like a 2-3 year minimum training requirement?
Couldn't do it in less than 2 years.
Yeah.
And 9 in-person weeks, right? That's what, Well, to quote Stan Groff again, these all these medicines need to be treated with great respect.
Yeah.
So that is a concern, that in all the enthusiasm, which is warranted in so many ways by the results we're seeing, still I'm concerned that people will miss the fact that part of the good results, this good treatment and safety record, is because there's been a lot of attention to preparation, training the therapist, support. It's been a very intensive process, and I think we can hurt people if they're not adequately prepared and don't have people that know how to support them.
Yeah. Something that comes to mind are like some of the ketamine infusion clinics that just like get up and running. And, I've just heard horror stories from either friends or other colleagues that have had clients and stuff go through that and have really difficult times. And that psychological support isn't there. They don't have a therapist on staff, and really just kind of coming from it more from that biochemical approach of, we're giving you a drug to treat X, Y, and Z versus, no, we're creating this whole container, right? It's all part of the process. And it's all very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a real thing. It makes me think of a few years ago now, I was having an interview with a journalist, and I was talking about the importance of integration and preparation, preparing people that sometimes really difficult stuff comes up, and sometimes you, as Annie said, you can have more symptoms before you feel better. And the importance of preparing them and then supporting people if that happens, and turning that challenge into a real opportunity for further healing. And the journalist said, well, that's interesting to hear you say that. That kind of makes sense, because when I started writing about this, I decided I should have my own experience. So I went, and I had some trauma myself, so I went to an underground therapist. And the only preparation was basically, she said, this is going to be great, you're going to love it. And I had a great experience, actually. I had a good experience during the day, but then I got home and I was incredibly anxious and all this stuff was coming up and I didn't know what to do. So I called the therapist and she said, oh my goodness, well, I think you should watch a movie on television to take your mind off it.
Wow.
So there's an example of, that was harmful.
Yeah.
And there are people out there doing it who don't have proper training.
The other good thing that's been happening is, psychiatric training programs for residents, and also, as part of their medical training. And there's a new program at University of Pennsylvania for nurses to have a track on psychedelic nursing that's starting. So some of those pieces are starting to come together too. There's so many young people that are interested in adding this as part of their education.
Yeah. It's wonderful. It's definitely an exciting time. And maybe this comes down to a last question. And maybe we'll start with you, Annie, and then you can answer Michael. What type of advice would you give to either young students or even professionals, therapists, and anybody in the field that really wants to get involved? What's the advice that you typically give people?
Well, I would definitely encourage them to do breath work at some point, holotropic breath work at some point when it opens back up. I can't say how incredibly powerful and useful I think that is, understanding the process, and or some other form of of body-oriented psychotherapy like Hakomi, or there are lots of, or IFS, internal family systems. There are a lot of those programs that happen for just weekend introductory sessions, and once we get through COVID, hopefully that'll start happening. I think those are really nice ways to check out all the different somatic experiencing, all those different things, and doing your own work, getting therapy. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Annie. And how about you, Michael? Any advice?
Yeah, well, I agree with what Annie said about breath work and some of these other trainings. Internal family systems is really important for me, and I think really is applicable to these sessions. And Annie's done Hakomi training. So yeah, you need we don't know exactly what the credentials are going to be, but getting some kind of therapy license is one step. But then I think these, so far, as we're waiting for more of this training to happen during residency and graduate school, it's still interesting how some of the most useful trainings are these things outside of formal academic training, like holotropic breathwork, somatic experiencing, Hakomi, IFS. So accessing those kinds of things can be great. And yeah, doing your own work. You know, I didn't mention when you were asking for updates, we have had a protocol for some years where we're able to give therapists who've been through our training their own MDMA experience. That was called MT1, and we finished that. It was 130 people ultimately. But we now have permission for MT2 for another study where we can start giving legal MDMA sessions to people who have been through the training. That's not up and running yet, but it's all approved. It'll be coming online again this year. So I think that'll be really good. The more opportunities we can get for people to have their own experience with things like breathwork and with psychedelic medicines, if they can, I think can be important. And yeah, it's an exciting time. I'd say what I found to be really important is a combination of a lot of impatience and a lot of patience.
Yeah.
You gotta be really impatient or this wouldn't happen. And it's sometimes frustrating. I mean, even thinking about the fact that we're talking about training for people to train to use a drug that doesn't even have FDA approval and isn't even guaranteed to have it, yet people are stepping up to get trained. So that takes a certain amount of impatience. But then,
and uncertainty too, right? I feel like a lot of people that come through us, they're like, "What do you mean? Like, what's the next step?" And I'm trying to explain it. It's like this all isn't 100% certain yet. We're still waiting.
Right, and I feel a little snarky when I say this, but that's been the way it is for the 22 years that we've been involved. Yeah. We've never known from one day to the next whether what we were doing was going to go forward or not. So that's kind of the nature of the beast. But I do want to say we're so gratified and excited about all the younger people with great hearts and motivation and energy and credentials and skills that are coming forward. So it's really exciting to see everybody stepping up, because I think this is going to be an important, really shift in psychology and psychiatry. And I think it's going to take a lot of dedicated people to follow it through.
It will, and wouldn't be able to do it except for people like you, right? Like you guys are really pioneers here, and definitely been a huge influence in my life and all the work that MAP's been doing and everybody that really came before us. So yeah, we need to keep charging forward for the younger generation. But thank you for all your work and sticking with it. I mean, it's been really awesome.
Thank you. If we're pioneers, that means Stan Groff and Ralph Metzner and many others are trailblazers. Yeah. We're just, maybe we're bringing some wagons down the trail that they played.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle, for all you're doing too. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Well, it looks like we're at time. So I want to just, again, thank you both for your time. It's been really awesome. A really big honor. I know I've been wanting to get you on for a while. I'm glad we were able to finally make it happen. Any closing thoughts? Anything that you guys want to end with for today?
I appreciate your interesting and well-informed and heartfelt conversation.
Yeah. Likewise.
Thank you. Good to spend this time together.
Likewise. All right, Michael, Annie, thank you so much. And everybody listening, I hope you have a great day, and we'll catch you on the next episode.